journey of quinoa out of South America's border was a rough one from the very beginning. It started with the Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, an half Spanish, half Inca chronicle and writer, born in Cusco, capital of the Inca Empire, in 1539, only a few years after the Spanish conquest. De la Vega arrived to Córdoba, Spain, at the age of 21, where he wrote about his life at the Inca Empire during the Spanish conquest. Those books are an important source of information about those crucial times in South American history. Garcilaso described a failed experience growing quinoa from seed sent to him from Peru. Unfortunately, by the time they have reached Spain, the seeds were dead, and the experiment turned up as a failure. Although Garcilaso did not repeat his trial, this turned out to be the first registered attempt to adapt quinoa outside of South America. There were no news about quinoa trails for a long time until the late 18th century. Florian Poch, a Jesuit monk born in Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, who lived among the Mocovi Indians in the hot and humid province of Santa Fe, Argentinian lowlands, described in his memory the Indians sowing a plant named quinoa, and also described the way they eat and cook it. Unfortunately, no more details were described. At about the same time, another Jesuit monk born in Argentina and named Gaspar Juarez left America to Italy, where he was put in charge of the Vatican's botanical garden in Rome, on a hill named Gianicolo. Luckily for us, Juarez had more expertise. He managed to multiply and botanically describe several species he brought from the Americas, like peanut, pineapple, chia, and also quinoa. He provided what is perhaps the first drawing of a quinoa plant, and claimed, just as Florian Poch did, to be from seed he brought from central Argentina, and just like Poch, he had also referenced the seed origin to be the Argentinian lowland. For years, this was the only proof for quinoa cultivation in that environment. Almost 2 centuries later, a group of Argentinian archaeologists found carbonized quinoa seeds in a place named Cerro Colorado, Red Hill, in the central province of Córdoba. After being radiocarbon dated, it was established that the seeds were between 700 and 300 years old. Previous references of Juarez and Poch, dated in the late 18th century, were then validated and leave us the last references for quinoa cultivation in that region.
Over the 19th century, a long silent period is registered. Quinoa was sporadically tried in several countries, but none of these reached the commercial scale of production. One of these experiences, although undocumented and still needing confirmation, is the cultivation of a kind of Quinopodium in the northern state of Himachal Pradesh in India. There, together with locally domesticated Quinopodiums, the farmers grow, still today, a kind of seeds called in English the earthen cultivar. And this one looks pretty much like quinoa. Therefore, since other American crops like sweet potato and maize reached Asia centuries ago, it allows speculating that quinoa could have been among them. Still, no official studies were to confirm that hypothesis yet.
Well into the 20th century, researchers were attracted to quinoa and started attending the species which, although important in the pre-Columbian times, had never become popular to the outside world. Armando Hunziker, a botanist at the National Academy of Science at the University of Córdoba, Argentina, wrote in 1943 an article about botany of quinoa, grain amaranths, and other related species like huazontle in Mexico and caniwa in the Andes. Then again, in 1952, a second article, this time not botanical, describing the uses of quinoa and references about quinoa from ancient texts, like the ones mentioned before. Those two articles became classical references for later quinoa research. But it wasn't until the 80s, when the glory days of quinoa were about to begin. A group of friends contacted one spiritual leader named Oscar Ichazo, leader of an institution called the Arica School, who told them about this kind of magical seeds from the Andes named quinoa. Eating those seeds, he said, was good for spiritual practices. Moved by the interest, they traveled to Bolivia to get acquainted with this plant, eager to learn everything they could from the locals. Stephen Gorard and Don McKinley, the two enthusiastic Americans, were later joined by David Cusack and John McCummon. Gorard eventually managed to send 20 kilos of quinoa to Don McKinley back in the US, which ex post facto made quinoa a breaking point to spread up to the world. The memories of Gorard are described in his book, The Quinoa Chronicles. Gorard and McKinley created what today would be called a startup, a company they properly named Quinoa Corporation. They started importing quinoa and selling it to the local market. Interest in organic, healthy food was growing actively. Soon, the business became a success. They diversified the product to quinoa flour or noodle, and years later, other companies would follow them. Quinoa became known as an organic and healthy food, and soon the markets demanded more and more products all over America. As demand increased rapidly, David Cusack and John McCummon decided to try cultivate quinoa in the US. They founded Sierra Blanca Associated in southern Colorado state and placed their trials at a high-altitude, dry place named San Luis Valley. This environment turned out as ideal for quinoa cultivation. They then traveled to South America to look for more germplasm. After an executive evaluation of around 130 genotypes from Peru, Bolivia, and central Chile, they found that those from central Chile did best at altitude of about 2,500 meters, while those from Peru and Bolivia at around 2,800. This was the start of commercial quinoa production in the United States.
After the mysterious assassination of David Cusack in Bolivia in 1984, near the ruins of Tiwanaku, John McCummon took the lead of quinoa production in Colorado. I met him in 2013 at a meeting at Washington State University, together with Stephen Gorard, and got acquainted to the legend. A quinoa variety with the red plant and orange-yellow seeds was named Dave after David Cusack, and it is grown today, even in China. By this time, the wheel was moving. Soon after, Dr. Dwayne Johnson, a breeder from Colorado State University, started working on quinoa by associating with Sierra Blanca Company. Together with a PhD student of him, Sarah Ward, they were able to produce a breakthrough in quinoa breeding by developing commercial quinoa hybrids. They identify a source of male sterility, that means only female flowers were produced by the plant, and also a source of a restoration factor which came with the pollen. These hybrids were able to produce 4 to 5 times the yield of the best parent, and those hybrids were able to yield around 4 to 5 tons per hectare in the field.
Colorado State University applied for a patent on one of the sources of male sterility, a Bolivian variety named Apelawa. It was immediately followed by complaints from the Andean researchers, particularly from Bolivia. It rapidly escalated into demonstrations claimed through the internet and even a demand before the United Nations. And that is how, despite the maneuver of patenting something found in nature was legal in the US, the patent was dropped and the quinoa program at Colorado State University dismantled due to the political conflict. A great opportunity was lost, as the Andean breeders never started their own hybrid quinoa program. And sadly, This would also mark a turning point in quinoa history, where discussion about quinoa would stop being just scientific or agronomic seeking for the truth and became a political issue.
At the same time that Quinoa Corporation started activities in the United States, Juan Risi, a young agronomist from Peru, reached Cambridge University in the United Kingdom to do his PhD there. His supervisor was Nick Galway, and he worked for several years evaluating quinoa germplasm and started breeding program. Together, they traveled to Peru and brought many more materials which were added to a collection of quinoa from the south of Chile belonging to the university. This was going to be the basis of the European quinoa breeding programs. Two breeding and adaptation programs would follow soon. One at KVL University in Denmark and led by Dr. Sven Jacobsen, and the other one in the Netherlands at Wageningen University, led by Dr. Robert van Loo. These two programs produce hybrids adapted to commercial production in European countries. These hybrids had shorter cycles, have a more determinate habit, and low saponin contact. These materials were not only used for cultivation in Northern Europe, but also in Mediterranean countries.
Quinoa was now spreading, emerging out of South America up into the world. It took almost 400 years and a long journey since the Mocovi plantations or the Inca Empire. Mother of seeds, miracle food is now open to the world to see.